This story is called The Cat's Life. I often wonder why my life has turned out the way it has. My beginnings were certainly unpropitious. My earliest memory is of living in a broken down barn with my mother and my 4 brothers, so I suppose I was probably born there. It was a drafty place. Many of the boards were missing, and the farther end of the building sagged to the point of near collapse. We rarely had enough to eat, but at least there was a warm place out of the wind to be found in the ancient haymow. I was small and skinny, perhaps better described as scrawny, but I fared better than 2 of my brothers who starved to death shortly after we were weaned. The other 2 succumbed to distemper our first summer. It was sad to see them get so weak and then just take themselves away to curl up and die. How and why I escaped such a fate, I have no idea. Humans seem to have the idea that kittens spend a delightful life playing a piece of wool or string. That may be the case for those fortunate enough to live, as I have discovered, in human homes, pampered with fish dinners and sources of milk. It's not how life unfolds for barn cats. I did have the good fortune, however, to be silent and quick as a hunter. I was able to fend for myself amid the local small rodent population when my mother's milk dried up early. But even this advantage had its downside. I matured early, and in that hard-scrabble environment, I was soon the object of sexual attraction to rough living toms. The result was that I became pregnant when I was hardly 6 months old. My litter of 3 kittens, 2 males and a female, were born prematurely, and all 3 died within hours of birth. As I considered the life of my mother, a life that appeared doomed to be shortened by pregnancy after pregnancy, I realized that my only hope was to escape. It was probably an unrealistic hope, whose most likely outcome would have been an identical life trajectory, but in a different location. However, fate or luck, call it what you will, was with me. One morning, I found myself at the side of a busy highway, tired and hungry, watching the cars and trucks go by. I was once again in heat and wondering whether my best course of action would be to throw myself under the wheels of one of those behemoths, so as to end my miserable life. Just as I was thinking about that, a car drew up, stopped right next to me. There were 2 female humans in it. I cowered down in the ditch, not knowing what they might do to me. Some humans are very unkind to stray cats. Fortunately for me, this pair was very friendly. They spoke to each other in a language that I did not understand as they got out of their car, and they addressed me with kind voices. One of them reached down into the ditch and picked me up. They carried me into their car and drove away, with one lady driving and the other one holding me gently but firmly on her lap. After a little while, the car stopped in front of a large house. My rescuers carried me into the house, where there was a large tomcat. What a gentleman he was! Despite the fact that I was in my most fertile state, he never once took advantage of me, but acted in the most friendly way towards me. I learned later that he was called Fred. At least, that was the sound that the people in the house used when they spoke to him or about him. The word they used for me was Elsie. They said it stood for little cat, because I was so much smaller than the one called Fred. I was immediately given a feast such as I'd never had before. Then, my stomach full, I was allowed to sleep. I certainly hoped that I would be able to stay in their house, at least temporarily, because it was warm and dry. There were several people living in the house when I first arrived. 2 ladies who rescued me, as well as another lady and 2 men. After a few days, some of the people left. Usually there were 2 people living in the house. One of them was a man and the other was one of the 2 ladies who rescued me. Sometimes other people came to the house and stayed for a few days. They always left again. Lately people sometimes come with a small child, but I tried to keep out of his way. He's, shall we say, somewhat enthusiastic. Actually, I've got much more used to having humans around. At first, I always went and hid when there were human visitors. Sometimes the house would be full of them for hours at a time. You just can't be too careful. But lately I found that most humans in houses are very friendly. The two permanent humans have always treated me very well. Especially when I first came to live with them, they gave me lots of food because, they said, I was very thin and needed to be what the lady called fattened up. I was very worried about this at first, as I knew that some of the animals where I'd lived previously were fattened up before they were taken away. When that happened, they disappeared and were never seen again. I hoped that I would not simply disappear like that, so I was very worried and frightened when one day, soon after my arrival at the house, I was wrapped in a kind of blanket and taken for another ride in the car. I thought perhaps I'd been fattened up enough to be sent away. When we arrived at our destination, I was carried into a different building, where there were people dressed in white coats. I could hear the sounds of other cats behind closed doors, and dogs as well. That thought terrified me because I had been chased by angry dogs in my former life on the farm. Not only that, but the other cats were crying out because they were afraid. One of them kept talking about going to Sun-Sun's, but I didn't know what that meant. One of the people in white coats prodded me and talked to my rescuer lady. Then she left, and the person in the white coat stuck something sharp into my side and I fell asleep. But it wasn't like my usual kind of sleep. When I woke up, I did not remember where I was and I was very afraid. I thought I must have become a disappeared cat. But later, the lady came back and took me back to her home. So that human lady is very nice to me. She feeds me all the time and lets me sit on her lap and even on her bed. I still do that almost every night. If I have spent part of the night downstairs, I call out to her to let her know I'm coming to lie down next to her. At first I wasn't so sure about the man in the house. He's very tall and he did not seem to like me as much as the lady does. It's because he really liked the other cat called Fred. I like to lie on the people's legs, facing out from their bodies. Fred preferred to curl up. Fred was a real softy, as people say. When other cats come into the garden behind the house, Fred did not seem to bother about them being there, and I had the responsibility of chasing them away. Fred did not have a loud voice, not like me, or even a loud purr, but he was always very friendly, to me and to the people. Fred and I became great friends. We would also lie together on the people's bed after they'd gone to sleep. We used to lie together on the sofa while the two people watched moving images on a machine that could talk. The people on the machine were not real. I could tell that because they did not have any smell. Things went on like this for a long time. Then I noticed that Fred was not able to eat his food properly. There seemed to be something wrong with his mouth. One day all of the people, there were 3 of them at that time, looked very sad. They took Fred away and they came back without him, looking even sadder than before. I don't know what happened to Fred, but he never came back. I really missed him. He was always good company. It was nice to be not the only cat in the family. But now I am. I think the male human in the family really misses Fred, even though he disappeared a long time ago. He calls me his second favourite pussy. It makes the ladies smile, but I don't know why. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes the people in the home go away for a long time. Then a different lady comes in and gives me my food and sits with me for a while. But I don't really like being the only person or cat in the home, so I'm glad when they come back. The first time it happened, I wondered if they'd gone away forever because they'd been fattened up. When I first arrived at this house, I used to chase away other cats that came on our property. It was my responsibility to stand on guard for thee, as the humans say. There were 2 orange cats that would intrude into my area, and as well as a black and white one. I only see one of the orange cats now, and him not very often. These days there's also a grey and white cat called Bob who lives nearby. I didn't like him at all at first, but he knew I was the boss on this property when I hissed at him. Did he ever take off quickly? He looks big, but actually he's quite a fraidy cat. Bob is what the humans call a real moocher because he's always trying to steal my food. At one time he tried to ingratiate himself with my male human, always purring and asking for food. But that stopped the day that the human tripped over Bob. He ran off even faster that day, didn't come creeping around for weeks. I guess I must be getting old. I can't be bothered to chase other cats or squirrels anymore. I've decided to retire and take life a little easier. Another thing that has changed is that I don't snack on birds or mice these days. Really, it's just too much trouble, and I get plenty of food every day. Every afternoon I get the wet food that comes in a little can. And the rest of the time there are usually plenty of little cat biscuits in my bowl. Lately I've been sleeping a lot more. I don't go out all that much. I've been starting to wonder what happens to cats like me when they get really old. Somehow I've got hold of the idea that there's a special rest home up for cats up in the sky, where you can sleep almost all day and you can eat all the cat food that you want. Maybe I'll meet Fred again when I go there. But he may be too busy to talk to me, because the male cats apparently have an unlimited supply of virgins at their disposal up there. Luckily I'm not a virgin, so I won't be bothered by them. Right now I'm not going to think about that anymore, because it's time for me to have another nap.